Welcome back. The National Institute for Communicable Diseases has confirmed a case of rabies in Limpopo province. An 8-year-old boy from Mbokota Village was admitted to a local hospital there after presenting various symptoms including fever, trouble breathing, confusion and serious challenges in mental abilities. The boy was also found to have thrush in the mouth, oral ulcers, ear discharge, septic swelling of the lower lip and swelling around the eyes with an accompanying discharge. Tests confirmed the child had human rabies. However, it was unclear whether he had been bitten by a dog. This year alone, there have been 13 cases of the viral disease recorded in the country. For more on this, we are joined by Chairperson of the Health Committee of South Africa, Dr. Angelique Coetzee. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Maybe can you start by explaining what rabies are and how typically can a human being contract the disease?
Good morning, Katlego, and good morning to all your viewers and listeners out there. Yes, I think it's important to understand that rabies is a disease that can be transmitted between animals and humans. It's nearly 100% fatal once symptoms starts to appear, so it's a very difficult disease to treat. But here is the important thing: it's a vaccine-preventable viral disease. And this disease can be prevented by vaccination of your domestic animals, as well as for humans working with this type of, or having and been infected or thought or think that they might have been bitten by a dog with possible rabies. There's also a vaccine available for those people. And I think this is the most important thing. You mentioned very important that there was no dog bite, but you don't need to have a bite. You only need to have some of these infected saliva being dropped onto an open wound, for example, or onto mucous membranes of the eyes, or so you don't need to have been bitten physically by an infected animal. As I've said, can be like that, but it can also be transmitted through mucous membranes.
That's very interesting, Doc. Can it also then be transferred from one human to the other once one has contracted the disease?
Not so much. It depends. If you are really very sick and you've got a lot of infection, again in your saliva, people doesn't take precautionary measurements. Again, you will not bite someone else. But if you've got open wounds in your hands and you are working with these patients without, again, precautionary measurements, you might get infected. But normally it is between animals and humans that this infection will take place. And it's also important that in South Africa, it's mostly the domestic dogs that are diagnosed with rabies. In America, interesting enough, it's more coming from the bats than from domestic animals. Also, please don't only think it's only dogs. Other animals might also be infected with the virus, livestock such as cattle, sheep, wildlife, jackals. We know that the jackal and some of the raccoons are also a problem. It's not that typically reported in South Africa that from small rodents such as mice and rats, and as I've said, the bats not so much a problem in South Africa. It's more a problem of America than in South Africa. So it is rare, as you have said. There's a few cases this year up until the last year. There was around about, from last year, the last 2 years, there has been an increase, and in the last 2 years we have seen nearly, up until the 22nd of September this year, we had seen 29 cases of human rabies. That was lab confirmed. There were others, but they were not lab confirmed, and that makes it difficult. And then also important to understand that the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, KwaZulu-Natal and the Free State are the provinces more susceptible of having these sort of infected animals than the other provinces.
And why is that so, Doc? Is it because these are predominantly rural areas and the access to the vaccination of those animals is not so prevalent? Why specifically those provinces?
I think that is one of the reasons, the access to vaccines. So for all the listeners out there and viewers, it is extremely important that if you have a dog or a cat, because cats can also give this, but if you have pets that you know that might be susceptible to get rabies, as we have said, dogs and cats very important. Please, at the age of around about 3 months, if they need their first vaccine, then within a year, they need their second vaccine, and then every 3 years, they need a booster vaccine. Most of these vaccines are being given out for free by government programs and NGOs, and I think it's important that you take your animals. It's not going to cost you a lot of money. You only need to get your dog to these institutes to get them vaccinated against rabies. It's very, very expensive to get humans vaccinated. The vaccine is quite expensive, but for animals, as I've said, there are places where you can go and get your dog and your cat injected for rabies. And yes, and that's maybe one of the problems, that there's not enough outreach teams in the rural areas, more in the urban areas. Also, I would like to draw people's attention that once a year, we also have a World Rabies Day. It's normally in September, and that is to raise awarenesses about the impact that you have between human and animal rabies. So please, it's a preventable disease, as I've said right in the beginning.
Most certainly. So once one has been exposed, Doc, to rabies, how long does it typically take for symptoms to start showing themselves? I mean, we spoke of the symptoms that the young man presented between oral thrush and an ear discharge and swelling of the lower lip. How long generally would you start seeing those symptoms after the exposure?
So if there is no post-exposure prophylaxis given, then your infected person may start experiencing symptoms anything between 1 to 3 months after exposure. So it's not only that I've been bitten today and tomorrow I will show symptoms. So anything 1 to 3 months after exposure. In rare cases, symptoms can develop after 14 weeks, sometimes after 6 months following an exposure. So this is very, very difficult. There is also very short incubation periods have been rarely recorded in cases without facial wounds. So if there's facial wounds, there might be a shorter incubation period. And for animals, it also varies, but in most cases for animals, it is more or less the same than in humans, anything between 1 month up until 3 months after you have been exposed to the virus.
And what would be the symptoms to look out for in animals?
So in animals, it's more or less the same than in animals, in adults and humans. And it is the dog, you get this hyperactive, this very furious type of dog. It can be very hyperactive, it can be agitated, or then you can get the other part of it, the paralytic type of form that you can get from rabies. Remember, rabies is a disease that actually causes damage to the brain and the spinal cord. So this is why you get this hyperactive, agitated type of furious dog or cat that you have. They can even hallucinate. It's also, that they're snapping at imaginary objects. I think there's something and they snap at that. And then hypersalivation is very common. And so, sometimes hydrophobia may also be noted in some. And then if they get the dump or the paralytic form, these animals experience most of the times muscle paralysis. So, and the wild animals, this is another thing. So don't touch a wild animal, because these wild animals may also lose their fear of humans and become strangely very tame. And you then go and touch the animal, and you've got an open wound. The animal is infected. He licks you. He doesn't have to bite you. He licks you. Comes onto the virus goes through the broken skin, and you get rabies. So it's not always to say you must have a dog bite. Please remember this.
Most certainly. Thank you so much for your contribution this morning, Doctor. That's the Chairperson of Health Committee of South Africa, Dr. Angelique Coetzee, speaking to us there about the importance of vaccinating animals in order to avert rabies.